First up is a film called Better Man, and this is a biopic about British pop star Robbie Williams. And if you're like me and American and of vaguely a certain age, but mostly American, you might not know who Robbie Williams is. I'm not gonna lie, I don't think his music necessarily transcended to the Americas as much, but if you are British, you know who Robbie Williams is. I was vaguely aware of him from talk show appearances, but I didn't know that he was in this huge boy band called Take That, which was probably amongst the first boy bands, actually. So the things I will note about Better Man as a film is that, one, this is definitely a musical. It's directed by Michael Gracie, who did The Greatest Showman, so it's like a full-on, we are using the music and Robbie Williams' music to express the emotions and move the plot along and all that sort of stuff. So if you're not a fan of musicals, just warning you now. The other huge thing I should note about this is that the character of Robbie Williams is being visually portrayed by a CG chimpanzee. And the explanation for this is apparently that is how Robbie Williams felt when he was performing, is that he was effectively a dancing monkey for his audience, and he had to go into kind of, a different mental state in order to get through performing. So it's a choice. It's an artistic choice. It does work relatively well. They got Weta, who did Planet of the Apes and are just absolute pros, honestly, at CG apes, to do the animation. And it's a tough line because as somebody who comes from a visual effects background, chimpanzees especially are so close to humans that they can fall into this thing called the uncanny valley, where you get freaked out by a CG or drawn representation of something because it's too close to human, but it's not supposed to be. And so the cognitive dissonance sets in. And so a chimp is a dangerous choice to have behave like a pop star, because it's not a chimp behaving like a chimp. It is just visualization of a chimp as doing all the things that Robbie Williams would be doing. So this is already sounding complicated, I know, but after that, it's a straightforward music biopic. So all that being said, I actually think it was very interesting, in part because, I didn't know a ton about Robbie Williams. And I think the thing that this has over something like, let's say, Rocket Man or Bohemian Rhapsody is that he is very vulnerable about letting them show a lot of the bad things that he did and that happened and all that stuff. I think the thing with something like Rocket Man, which is a film I actually enjoy, is that you can feel the interference from Elton John in that. And this, obviously, Robbie Williams, he's an executive producer on it. He's involved. So it's not like it is free from that completely. But I do think that he was yeah, have that. And I think the film is better off for it. As someone who is not familiar with Robbie Williams' music, I thought it was fine. It fit well. They knew what songs to pick from his entire, music library in order to advance the story. I got used to the chimp thing after a while, but, as I said, as someone who comes from visual effects, I was, watching it like a hawk. And there were times I'd be well, that's an interesting choice. And then I found out from the director that they have different rigs for different points. And so it's more ape-like at other points, and it's, a little more human in points. So I was actually, that's kind of cool, and I'm glad that he acknowledged that. All that being said, as a story, if you are a fan of the musical biopic, I think this is actually a really good entry into that. If you are a fan of Robbie Williams, so if you already knew who he was, I think this is a well-consolidated telling of all the things that he went through, and I think it is not shying away from the rawness of a lot of it, so I'm gonna guess that it'll actually endear you to him further. If you had no idea who he was, it is fascinating, sometimes morbidly so, because the temptations of fame and all the things he went through, and there are some very famous people who you actually will know who they are for sure. In this, there was a point where I was is that actually supposed to be this character? And then I went, oh no, that actually is this person. I mean, it's supposed to be this person. This is not him making it up or hallucinating or thinking that person is wrong. So there are notable people in it who you will recognize globally. And again, the chimp thing, they pulled it off. The chimp thing, they pulled it off. I'm going to give them credit where credit is due. It's strange. I don't think I ever want to see that type of interpretation again. I think you get one shot at this, and they took the shot and it works fine. But, let's not continue this. Let's not have a menagerie of biopics with different animals starring as, famous people. So anyway, all that being said, I think it is an interesting, entertaining film. Again, you do have to be willing to sit through a musical for it, which is, I know, off-putting to some people. I don't want to get in trouble here, but Greatest Showman, not my cup of tea in any way, shape, or form. So I was a little reticent going into this, but I think this is very different than Greatest Showman in terms of the way, in part because it is focusing on one singular artist, it is focusing on one singular character, as opposed to the kind of more supporting characters, or I guess an ensemble of Greatest Showman, and also it's a little more modern, all those things. So I enjoyed it. I think it's an entertaining time at the movies. I'm going to give this a 4 out of 5. The next film I have this week is called The Prosecutor. It is directed by and stars Donnie Yen, and it's interesting because in this one, usually he plays a military person or a policeman or something like that. In this one, he does play a policeman, but it's a policeman turned prosecutor, and so it actually is a lot of a legal thriller, and it takes place in Hong Kong. And if you know anything about, the history of Hong Kong and the transition between British rule to, Chinese rule, and then like the laws, it just happened in 97. It's an interesting place to have a politically set criminal thriller. It also, because it is a Donnie Yen film, like he knows what he's doing in terms of like what his audience wants. So there is plenty of action in this, but I actually thought that the legal thriller part of it was maybe sometimes a little more interesting. Like, this isn't the greatest film of all time, for sure, but it is nice to see him stretch a little bit and do things that are a little bit outside the comfort zone. I think Donnie Yen, it's not that Donnie Yen, like, unlike some of, I think, certain other stars, is, like, afraid to play outside of type. He just knows what he's really, really good at. But this, I think, his prosecutor character finds that fine line of, obviously morally on the side of right, and the crafting the story around that, I think, was actually pretty clever, because it forces everyone else to be ambiguous, so you do get to play a little bit of game of like, is this actually a bad person or is this a bad person? Like, what's going on here? It's very cliche in certain points. It is very Hong Kong cinema in many other points. Like, I'm just gonna be super upfront about it. But if that is the type of thing you like, I think this is actually worth seeing. This is not like an Ip Man. This is not a John Wick. This is not any of those other, like, more, I think, Western-friendly films. And obviously those are, like, well, Ip Man is a little different, but, like, when Donnie Yen stars in John Wick, that's a Western culture film. This is definitely, like, a Hong Kong thriller. So, all that being said, if you are a Donnie Yen fan, I think this is worth watching. If you are new to the Donnie Yen filmography, I think there are plenty of other things that you're going to want to start with first to go through his catalog. But if you become a convert, you can add this to the list. I was actually really surprised by how much the kind of legal thriller of it eventually got me, because I was going into thinking like this is just going to be an action film and like the prosecutor part is just going to be kind of like mild. And look, do the things they do in court make any sense, and or are they actually what happens in a Hong Kong court? No. Or any court, not just a Hong Kong court, excuse me, like in any court. No. But this is also a movie, so you have to take that into consideration. I know they did their research, I know they had consultants, but it's also a movie, and that's good. You're not watching cam footage of an actual case take place. So you do want the dramatized stuff, you do want it, some of it a little cheese, like I said, but overall it held my attention. I'm gonna give this a 3.8 out of 5. The last thing I want to talk about this week is a documentary. I just want to put it on your radar. It is out on Netflix and it's called Don't Die, The Man Who Wants to Live Forever. This is a shout out to my friend who recommended this to me. It's about a man called Brian Johnson, who is a multimillionaire, and he is obsessed with trying to defy aging and slow his aging rate and not die. I mean, maybe like live to 200, live as long as he can, etc., etc. And he has the money to throw at it. Now, is this a story of like, this is such, I don't want to say a misappropriation of funds, because, if he was actually trying to advance general medical stuff, I'd be like, okay, I'm totally on board. And of course, he has a tech startup company that is also designed to help, with protocols or whatever it is about slowing the aging process, et cetera, et cetera. It feels like he wants to become a cult leader. He's very much on social media. So are there many better things he could do with his funds? Yes, absolutely. Is there still a gross morbid curiosity at watching him do the science experiments on himself effectively? Also, yes. Like, as a documentary, I respect that it is challenging when you have an unsympathetic protagonist like this. And he is about as unsympathetic as it gets. Now, they do try at points to be like, oh, well, he struggled with this growing up and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yeah, but like, kudos to him. He made a butt ton of money. And yes, it is his butt ton of money to use as he wishes. But my God, if this doesn't exemplify the socioeconomic gaps that exist today and why they are a problem and why actually they're a problem in healthcare, I don't know what else does. So he is, I found myself repulsed by him because of the way he is just spending his money, and his desperation to be liked, I think, comes across very well in this documentary, and I don't know if he would even deny that. And then there's this whole bizarre thing where his son is a part of it, and I'm like, I think this man I mean, he openly kind of is like, he wants to be his son because his son is like 18. And so he's like prime of his life, and I'm sure if this man had $400 million, which I think is net worth, like at 18 and had this obsession in mind, like he would be like, oh my God, I could do so many different things, which is fair, right? But he not only does like he want to be his son, I'm like, oh man, I think you're like in love with your son in I don't want to say like inappropriate way, but it's the way he talks about his son is unsettling. And sometimes, and this will be, I'm like, I feel like he wants to like consume his son. And there are things in the documentary where like, oh, you are like fusing together in a way that I'm like, oh my God, there are so many lines that get crossed in this, and it is so hard to look away. Like as a documentary as a whole, story-wise, it's a little messy, but I think if you are somebody who is, again, I don't have a better word than morbidly fascinated by this type of thing, boy, howdy do I have a doc for you. Again, from a technical perspective, not the greatest thing I've ever seen, but from a like, oh, I put it on, I could not look away. For that, it gets an A+. It's out now on Netflix.